right? So that's the other big thing on this is there's so much speed in the way this happened that API became a buzzword. And we have individuals that would go into an employer and say, well, we have APIs. That was the pitch, right? And they wouldn't get into the expectation, they wouldn't understand what the client actually needed, what their pain points are, understand that client experience. And at the end of the day, most of the time when they said, we have APIs, they weren't APIs, they were fake APIs, right? So they were some level of data transfer that had individuals manually shifting spreadsheets in the background and trying to project that they were tech forward, right? And at the end of the day, the client doesn't care, right? APIs are definitely the future and file connectivity is the future, but they just care that their evidence of insurability is gonna go over to carrier and they're gonna get a decision back in their net admin. Or their eligibility goes from the benefits administration to the carrier in a timely manner so that the individual that just enrolled in dental can go see their dentist, right? So that fake API piece is really taking the complexity I just talked about and made it even more complex because no one knows what we're talking about and we really have to dig into that client. One thing that we want to make sure is how the data is protected and certainly being able to have the controls in place. A lot of the data that we leverage and we use is fairly sensitive in the group health and benefits world. So we want to make sure that those controls are in place, that we're using it responsibly and make sure that we can do that. With that being said, we're definitely putting in the building blocks, right? Because we do want to create a better client experience. We want to be able to automate some of the routine tasks that we do in our implementation, our claims, our underwriting process. And so we're starting to build out different areas within our organization to be able to do that. For example, not generative AI, right? We're not there yet, but a building block to that, we're looking at our call center data, our member services data to say, okay, are there common questions, right? We're using voice recognition technology to do that. We're also looking at it from a new client basis. We're taking technology to examine their old contract that they had with their prior carrier and say, hey, did we match all of that? Because that's an important thing. We don't want a client to come on board and say, oh man, I had this with my last carrier, why didn't you put it in my existing contract? We didn't know. And before that, we would literally have to go through 45-page contracts and say, okay, is this provision okay, right? So we're putting in the building blocks because we do find value and we will see value in that in the future, not just generative AI, but every type of innovative technology that we're starting to see come into the insurance world. We're just being a little bit more thoughtful and careful around how we're protecting that data because again, it is pretty sensitive. One of my favorite stats right now is in 2012, there was about $420 million global HR tech investment into what we're talking about. In 2019, that number was up to $5 billion, and then 2 years later in 2021, it was $17 billion. So you have all of this capital coming into an industry that is ripe for opportunity of disruption, right? Because there's a lot of manual processes we talked about still using forms and spreadsheets and Excel, but that's created a lot of complexity, right? And point solutions along the entire lens of the client experience for what we do, quoting, implementation, sales enablement, lead gen, all that stuff that's happening, right? And that is the navigation that a lot of our clients, employers, and a lot of the brokers we work with every day need. It was a simpler time. I don't want to say simple because nothing's ever simple. 4 or 5 years ago, right, where you had a number of carriers like ourselves, you had brokers, and then those brokers had employers and employees. And so we wanted to make sure we got the employees the coverage they need, like yourself, during open enrollment. It was a little bit simpler. Now you have all these different layers, right? You have the benefits on benefit admin platforms. You have human capital management systems. You have payroll. You have some companies that are 1, 2, or all 3 of those things. You have individuals that are building these platforms, right? And a whole host of other layers, some of which work with us, some of which work with brokers, some of which are brokers, right? And so navigating that complexity is really important because at the end of the day, the underlying data, we were just talking about this, is really the same. It's enrollment, it's eligibility, it's what I need to pay for my benefits, it needs to get to my payroll so I can pay for it, and it's plan design. So how do we come together, make sure that data transfer is simpler and happening real time, and making sure that when you go to enroll in your benefits, or frankly use your benefits, because that's the place that we create the value for those clients, that it's nice, easy, seamless, and it works.